Okay, thank you very much. We had 3 productive sessions, and we are now on our fourth, and this is the Q&A portion. So this is actually not the last for the day because we still have another one, which is the Tech Talk, which comes after this. But this is the culmination of the first 3 sessions that we had for today. So we encourage everyone to ask your questions. If you have questions which were not answered previously, or you feel that you wanted more out of your questions, then feel free to type them here, and so we can get the conversation going. So we have a first one from Jest Romanilios for Dr. Bargav. Considering we implemented those in your presentation, how can we know if we initiated efficient collaboration for a project? How can we improve if we are being...
I think that's a fantastic question. How do you know if you're collaborating? I think, look, traditionally one of the biggest indicators of kind of this, silo-based communication is RFIs. And I mean, a simple answer would be that you should see a reduction in those sort of RFIs, sort of flying backwards and forwards. That should really, sort of improve the situation on the ground, because people are discussing more with each other, and hopefully in an informal setting where they don't feel threatened by each other. But in kind of in a more structured way, of course, you will know people are collaborating when you have more collaborative planning sessions. When people deploy these tools, there is a structured way of doing this. So you can have set kind of cycle of, these sort of collaborative planning meetings. Typically, sort of teams who do this, they have these sort of meetings either on Thursday or Friday to discuss what is going to be done next week, and then reviewing what was done last week and things like that. And that could be quite effective. And so that should really sort of set you off on the journey. And there are sort of tools. For example, the Last Planner system has inbuilt tools to help you measure your performance as a team, both planning performance as well as kind of other sort of performances. And that should really sort of set you on the path to improve, because then once you start measuring the efficiency, you can start to kind of look at what's not working well, and then sort of improve on those sort of things. So for example, if a subcontractor or a supplier is constantly sort of indicating that they are not getting material deliveries on time, then you can start to address that, and that should really then improve your production performance. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah. Okay. He says that did it. You did answer his question, and it was insightful. So thank Dr. Bargav. For Hargit, we have another one from Paramjit. Till date, we are still dealing with design changes through execution, and so we come across the model revisions going up to 40 to 50 revisions. In that sense, BIM is always catching up to execution rather than helping plan for it. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Paramjit. This is something I also come across most of the times, but I would say like here, one of the lean principle comes into place, and that says that don't start the new activity until the first one is finished. So we have to keep a check that the design is finalized for the execution phase before we go to the execution phase. So as I explained in one of my slides, that how important is clash checking, for example, how important is to combine the whole model and see for yourself if we have any discrepancies in the data or the clashes. So yeah, that would be my answer, that until we are done with the design, we shouldn't go to the execution phase. But I would also like to add it here that sometimes we start the execution of the ground, such as in the case of decontamination of the ground or the foundation. But definitely, if we want to have the elements of the prefabricated elements, we should not go even for the procurement until the design is finalized, because we might think that this is the faster way of doing it, ordering everything in advance. But in the longer run, we might say that even if there is some measurement issues for the elements that we want to order for the delivery, it is going to delay the whole project, and the cost escalation and the risk that will arise will be tremendous. So yeah, I hope I answered it.
Okay. Okay. There's another one from the previous session. This is from Jose Palak. If we are to introduce BIM or Lean to projects, how much does it cost to the client, or who should bear the? I think, how much does it cost, and who should bear the cost? That's a
Should I start with, or Dr. Dava, you would like to answer this? I think you have more experience.
So can you please repeat the question, Brian? Sorry, I missed.
if we are to introduce BIM Lean to projects, how much does it cost to the client? So, or another question is, who should bear the cost of all this too?
That's an interesting question. It's kind of on case to case basis in terms of the cost. I'll start there first, because I've seen that when the contractors are convinced about the benefits, in so many cases now I've seen that they have started to deploy BIM even if the client is not paying for them and paying for that explicitly. So they have in-house modelers who are actually modeling the design and helping them with 4D and 5D and other things, even when the client is not paying for that. But in most cases now, especially when you have a situation like UK where you have the mandate from the government to deploy BIM on certain projects, the client, I mean, that's going into the contract. So the cost is then, of course, borne by the client. And, the model is then sort of designed. And yeah, I mean, how much is the cost is very difficult to answer, because that just depends on the type and the size of the project. Look, when it comes to Lean, Lean can be done, with hardly any explicit cost, because I mean it's a people-centric method. You don't have to necessarily have very expensive tools. But of course, it goes more into leadership that Professor Morgan was talking about. You need to provide leadership to those people in order to kind of deploy these sort of things, deploy Lean and so on. And coaching and mentoring will be pivotal if you want to kind of achieve something like that. So the answer is that for BIM, of course, BIM costs, again, they depend on the size of the project. There are some rough metrics that people use, that X per square foot and so on. But again, that just varies so much from place to place. It's hard to kind of standardize. But each country will have sort of their own sort of benchmarks where BIM is sort of priced up. And again, BIM has different levels of details and things like that. So you can say LOD 200 could be X and LOD 450 could be Y and so on. So yeah. So
Okay, Hargit, would you like to add to that, or do we proceed to the?
I think Dr. Dave explained very well, and that was also my point. And somehow I believe that calculating how much cost for the BIM, for the implementation of BIM, is quite difficult, because it definitely depends on projects, and projects are different. But I would say, like, as a contractor, if I am a contractor, for example, I say, and I want to implement BIM, then I need some kind of collaboration from the design team as well. So starting it from the scratch and building my own model just by taking information from the planners is going to complicate the process. So BIM collaboration is actually a team of effort. That's why we call it collaborative work. So, but I see nowadays that most of the contractors, as Dr. Dave said, that they are having their in-house BIM departments, and that actually helped them, because one of the functionality of BIM is the 4D scheduling. And how absurd it might sound, but it's quite helpful. Like during my research, I used Vico Office for doing the 4D scheduling, and at the end we calculated that the productivity we can achieve with that is quite high as compared to the simple MS projects. Because in using 4D planning, you can actually see the activities, how they're linked with each other, and you can synchronize the whole process. So that means, for example, I'm a contractor. For me, what's important is that when my painter is doing a job somewhere, then he shouldn't be disturbed by the other team doing parallel work with him. How can I keep a check on that if I don't have some kind of visual tool to do it? So these kind of things really help contractors to go forward. So I might say, yes, the implementation costs might be high, but it definitely has its fruits in the longer run. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hargit. We have we have another one. Do you find any resistance in project teams to try new technologies, or is there a positive trend with digitalization generally that is easier today to introduce new tech and new methods to the quite traditional industry of construction than previously?
Shall I
yeah.
give the first response on that? So yes, it is a very sunny day here in London, very unexpected. So there is a lot of sunlight coming in, but yes, you get a lot of resistance, and Dr. Day talked about that in his presentation in one of his final slides. And actually, that's one of the key factors that we have to overcome in the construction industry. It's not relating to the technologies, I don't think. I think the technologies that we're trying to use are pretty rudimentary in many ways. If you compare it to the technologies that are being used in other industries, I think a lot of it is to do with the resistance and the organisation and the behavioural change that's needed. When you're looking at the resistance in project teams, however, you have to recognise that there is a great variety, there's a great range of resistance. And often, and I know Hargit and I were talking about this, and I have come across it time and time again, there is a different level of digital comfort in different members, and often of the project team, and often that's related to age, and often the willingness to confess, I don't know how to use it, is related to seniority. So that's something we should always bear in mind, and I think that can create some issues that we were talking through.
Okay. Your thoughts, Dr. Bhargav and Hargit, or should we proceed?
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I have no nothing to contradict. They're absolutely spot on. And my experience is the same. The resistance comes from many different levels, and so many times it's actually quite the unexpected that people generally perceive that the ground level will offer the most resistance, but that might not always be the case. In our actually experience, once you show the benefits, they are the first ones to actually convert. The most of the resistance comes from the middle and the senior sort of management, and that's where the entire game is kind of in this whole leadership and conversion. So fully agreed.
Okay, we have another question. I am interested to know how the team envisage suppliers, subcontractors, and other site-based team members 100% bought into the methods we are suggesting. That's from Nick Smith. Anyone? That's an open.
Happy to take this. Actually, this from traditional kind of process perspective, this would be very hard to achieve. And again, my experience has been kind of then when you have this sort of low cost bid sort of passing through and your traditional contracts, this is quite difficult to achieve in those sort of circumstances where you have procured through those sort of channels. But some of the partnering projects, and even in those traditional projects, but where you have again leadership to kind of go towards these new methods, lean and collaborative sort of techniques, it is possible. I mean, I've seen, there was one example, one project I visited in San Francisco, where it was a government project, and because of that, they had to procure through the traditional sort of tendering methods, but still they were able to bring the suppliers and subcontractors on the same platform. But other than that, I think it is quite possible to have sort of certain either alliancing projects or IPD type of projects, or then even in design bid and build projects, it's possible to bring in suppliers and subcontractors on the same table, as long as there is kind of willingness at the top to do that. It is also important to build trust. I mean, trust is something we didn't speak about much today explicitly, but all of this is kind of connected to trust. If there is no trust in the team, none of this is going to work. And no matter how many sort of tools and techniques we deploy, it's going to break down. I've seen cases where people use tools and techniques to almost do quite the opposite, where they abuse the system and the power of technology to kind of bring in more inefficiencies into the process. So if it was to done, it is possible through kind of this new sort of contractual methods, but even through some sort of hybrid methods, I've seen that it's possible to bring in 100% of the supply chain into the process.
Okay. Anyone else who would like to take that question?
Yeah, if I could just add to that, Brian, and I agree totally, Dr. Dave, with what you were saying. I think maybe just one thing to add to that. So when we were working with Skanska around the digital leadership space, the supply chain really emphasized the importance of buy-in, of collaboration, of coming up with visions together. So it wasn't just Skanska saying, we want you, our supply chain members, to do this, and then you can be on our approved list and we may give you some work. But actually to look at, okay, we want you to use this technology. How are we going to share that risk with you? How are we going to share that investment? So that's when you're looking longer term. When you're looking shorter term, I think that I use the phrase bottom-up innovations. A lot of the digital innovations in a project, especially mega projects like Thames Tideway, came from the site, came from the construction workers who said, okay, this would really improve my day-to-day work. And a lot of them weren't particularly expensive. They didn't involve a huge investment. So the other thing we found at Thames Tideway was a lot of people realised in our interviews when we were talking to them that actually they said we could do a lot more with what we've already got. So if you think about even something like Outlook, your organisation only probably uses it for email. It can do a lot more than that. So and you can replicate that across lots of different tools. So that's a really important thing for projects, which is doing more with what you've already got.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Beth. So we proceed with the next one. What do you think about using drones, cameras, and laser scanning to find out the status of the project and use it in lean management? Anyone? Hargit is smiling because she knows I'm tempted. But
no, I'm just smiling because it's the fancy way of saying what technology can do to you. I came across a picture and there was like a robot holding a plan, a 2D plan of the picture. So that's how we actually understand technology. But I would say one step at a time. First, we need to understand the loopholes of our own construction processes and then go one step at a time. Of course, drones can give us the status, but who knows that's the status that we are looking for. Anybody can update from the site that this process is done 80%. But until I have a proof, until I go and see for myself or it checks my checklist, it's not 80% done. So I would say one step at a time would be my answer.
Yeah, I would like to go in there as well. And I agree with Hargit 100% that actually we need to take kind of baby steps here. We need to make sure that the fundamentals in place before we build on top of that. This is what I said in my presentation too, that the foundations need to be strong before you start deploying more advanced sort of tools and techniques. Because if the foundations aren't strong, then these technologies, in my opinion, have a tendency to kind of do more harm than good. This is my my observation, because you could be coming back with something completely unrealistic. But saying that, on the projects where actually are able to kind of deploy, for example, more advanced tools, and they have done it in for example the right way. I mean, I gave the example of Maze there in the case study. They are actually using all the technologies that Mika you are mentioning, drones, 360-degree cameras, and laser scanning and all that, to kind of then constantly capture reality and reconcile that back to the model. And that then can give you the power to kind of again visualize and complete kind of constantly take into consideration what's the ground level reality and take control of the situation. So if you both in planning as well as kind of production management and also continuous improvement, because when you're improving, you also need to get the data based on which you kind of taking decisions. So these kind of technologies are for sure kind of connected to lean management as well, as long as you have the basic infrastructure, the lean infrastructure in place, as you kind of mentioned there, lean management. You need to have the basics in place before you start deploying these more advanced tools. This is how I
Okay, thank you, Dr. Day. Dr.
Brian, can I add something here?
Yeah, go ahead.
I didn't read the laser scanning actually. Just read it right now. I was stuck at drones actually. Yeah, so I read a case study about Victoria Station in London, I think, and it's somehow located in a very busy area. So when they were going to do the renovation, or I think they were trying to build a tunnel behind or like a substation, it was quite challenging because it was in the middle of everything. And that time they actually used laser scanning to understand how are they going to proceed with the construction, to understand what's existing. And also it helped them to understand what kind of transportation they would need, how they are going to bring in the materials and take out the materials without disrupting the whole thing. So I think, yes, laser scanning is definitely far more advanced and quite useful when we talk about BIM. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's proceed to the next. Okay, this is from Larissa Cañales. If digital leadership will be put on practice in the future, how does it affect lean management in terms of effectiveness? And how does it enhance the collaboration within, oh, it moved. Within, oh, sorry, it's moving. Within the system of organization with regards to different culture. Any thoughts? It's an open.
Right. So just to check I've got the question correct. There were two parts. So the second part was about how digital leadership affects collaboration. Is that right?
How does it enhance the collaboration within the system or organization?
Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll take that, and then there was another part, and maybe one of my colleagues can take the other one. So with regards to collaboration, there's a scholar academic who actually does a lot of research about technologies in other industries. He's an information management scholar who identified these two key components or aspects of technologies, digital technologies, and they're combinatorial, he said, and they're generative. So increasingly, digital technologies require work across boundaries, be that organizational, be that time in projects, different phases of projects, different occupations. You have to be able to collaborate. And digital leadership is absolutely key in enabling that, because there are all sorts of practical day-to-day barriers to collaborating. And the rhetoric, I think, doesn't acknowledge that, what the reality, what the day-to-day is. So the day-to-day is very, very different, and contracts and legal aspects and your own personal sort of human resources, or can I share this knowledge? I'm not quite sure if that's all right or not. And digital leadership and leading by example is absolutely key to enabling the sort of behaviours that you need The other thing that Dr. Dave talked about is trust. Leadership is key to allowing trust within organizations. And again, I'm going to use the leading by example. So your behavior dictates the behavior of those within your teams. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues now. I don't know if they want to.
Dr. Barga?
No, I fully agree with Professor Morgan there. I think it's completely understood that leadership kind of then can support both this collaboration and trust, as she mentioned. I will try and answer the first part of the question, which is kind of that if that's put in place, how does it affect lean management? And kind of it takes me back a little bit. We wrote a guide for Syria in sort of implementing lean and BIM, and there was a graphic we produced in the beginning of that there are two kind of hypotheses. One is that lean sort of supports BIM, and then sort of the vice versa, that BIM can support lean and so on, and then BIM tools can support lean deployment and other things. And that basically kind of there is a loop there. Both are sort of synergistic in a way that if you are deploying lean processes, then collaboration and all that will come into play, and that will help BIM deployment and other digital sort of tools on top of that. And also the other way around. We just had a question from Mika about how those sort of digital technologies like IoT and drones and laser scanning, and how that can sort of improve lean deployment. On the same topic, if you have leadership on sort of the digital leadership, that should be kind of supportive of lean sort of culture and so on. It should be synergistic in nature. And my dream is to have a combined lean and BIM leader rather than one or the other. It should be, it should not be, at least if anything, it should not be in confrontation of each other, which is sometimes the case, not so much, because lean inherently has to be collaborative. But having silos is not good for anybody. And I think my sort of, hope is that one day you will have production management as a whole, which kind of embodies both digital as well as kind of the lean practices within one. So rather than having these two separate leaders, you would have one leadership team, which would then take a look at kind of more holistic sort of perspective. So that's my take on that part.
Okay. Well, we have another one from Nick Smith. What role can coaching, mentoring of team members take place? And is it for the PM or client or contractor to arrange? Should the team think this is a way forward? Anyone?
Happy to take this. Look, again, this has come from, in my experience, I've seen tens of deployments of both lean and digital. And again, every case is different. In some cases, for example, this Maze case study that I mentioned, it's a jointly led. Client is also leading because it's a tech space customer and client, which is quite enlightened, and they're bringing quite a lot of leadership, mentoring, and so on in place. And the contractor is also pushing the boundaries, and they're both sort of working together, which is quite fascinating to see because that's not the case every time. On the other hand, in the UK especially, my experience has been that the clients are leading quite a bit. You have clients like Highways England, Network Rail, Ministry of Justice, and so many others who are actually providing a lot of mentoring across their whole supply chain. And, whose role is it? I would say at least public sector clients have some mandate to make these sort of things happen. Highways England quite famously has been leading this sort of lean and now BIM deployment sort of drive as well. And they are providing training and mentoring and so on to the tier 1s and 2s and 3s, in terms of the supply chain. Similarly, other sort of public sector bodies too. But I've also seen contractors like Professor Morgan mentioned Skanska. I know similar things exist in Balfour Beatty as well, Costain and so on. I've seen them quite closely. In some cases, I've also supported some of these initiatives, and so they exist in different sort of levels. Even designers, we've just have finished some work with COVI in Denmark in sort of providing some of these leadership. So yeah.
Can I also add to that, Brian, that I think, Nick, the answer I would give, and I think this echoes, is informally, all of those people that you've said are responsible for some coaching and mentoring. Formally, obviously, the schemes tend to exist within organisations, but increasingly, and this is really interesting to think of in the future, maybe we should be looking outside organisations. And I know, looking back over my career, actually a lot of the informal mentoring I've received outside organisations has been perhaps the most valuable, because it's then that you're totally away from any organisational politics. So that's food for thought, I think.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Morgan. I think we have a few more. So this is from Eulogio de Lima. To all the speakers, there are construction models, information models being used by big companies around the globe, which are proven effective in some of their projects and also not effective in other projects. Like, for example, in scheduling, which we have P6, a computerized scheduling tool, and yet many projects are still encountering delays. What really makes a project successful is introducing the BIM new technology or injecting good managers in the project. That's for everyone.
Can I start? I would like to take this question. So, as a construction project manager myself, I would say we do a lot of planning. But first of all, I would say like all the projects are quite different. And this is like one of the difference that we have with the manufacturing industry, because their boundary conditions are somehow fixed. But we have different, because in our cases, the external factors that affect the planning are sometimes the geographical location of the project and most predominantly the political interference that we have in the projects. So those are the, I would say, the key risk areas that we have to take in consideration. But to be honest, we all do the project planning based on the experience we have, or the assumptions that we make that might work in this project. And the buffer that we keep, for example, between two activities, this is actually the reaction time that we need. This is the time where we can react before a catastrophe is going to happen or a risk is going to escalate. So this is the reality of project planning. This is how the project planning is done. Just my perspective, it could be different. But I would say implementing BIM or lean mentality, we have discussed a lot about it, that lean is more of a way of doing things, and BIM is more of a platform where we can implement that. So using that, what is going to change is, for example, in the 40 schedules, as I say, it's going to help you with the visualization of the activities, how they are running with each other, and what is the correlation of the two activities that's going to happen on the site. So I think this kind of approach of BIM definitely helps us to plan better. And definitely we want to be better project managers, better project planners. But for that, we definitely need the right and the accurate amount of information from the project itself. Yeah. Now I think my colleagues can proceed.
Thanks, Hagi. I totally agree. In terms of saying what a key factor of project success is, very difficult, because all projects are different. It depends on the location, duration, political involvement, all of these other things. But one thing that, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But one thing I would say is constant is you have a much better chance of success if you have good leadership. And when we're thinking about project leadership, you're thinking about leadership across the supply chain. You're thinking about, can be sort of informal leadership on the project team itself. So leaders aren't just C-suite executives. I know that's what I've focused on today, but you can see it in many other ways. You might be looking at industry leadership as well. So big projects like Thames Tideway, they respond to industry leadership and they will feed back into those policies very clearly. And that, for me, is the key factor for success in a project that's likely to make your project more successful. We know that early involvement and briefing is very important in enabling BIM or other technologies to be deployed effectively in projects.
About
No, I think almost everything is covered. Nothing much new to add. But just one thing to mention that kind of, Elogio, you mentioned tools like P6 and BIM is also can be perceived as a tool as well. Your end of the question is what really makes a project successful? Is it introducing new technology or injecting good managers in the project? The later comes first, absolutely no doubt about that. No matter how many, as kind of this has been discussed, no matter how much new technology or tools you throw at it, not going to solve the problem. P6, not just P6, but other tools exist, scheduling tools and so on. They've been used on practically all projects, and still we have the outcome of 90% of projects end up with, or over 90% projects end up with some kind of cost and budget overruns. So they're not going to save you unless you have good project managers. But on top of that, I think, as kind of has been discussed by Hargeet and Professor Morgan, there are many other factors, and one of which is that, as I mentioned as well, that production management systems need to be there, and in order for any good project manager to kind of then also leverage, and build on top of that. So that's sort of my take on that.
Okay, so this is the last question, and then we will wrap this up. How does digital transformation of project planning and implementation during this time of pandemic affect the construction project or construction projects?
Yeah, we have seen this kind of now very closely in last whole year. It's almost like I mentioned in my presentation that it's almost now seen as as something that has become a necessity. Until, let's say, February last year, it was somehow an optional thing that do we digitally plan and collaborate and implement these tools. Suddenly after COVID, this was no longer an option for almost anybody that at least major customers that we speak with, and other sort of construction companies that I come across or projects that I come across. So I think it's it has sort of accelerated the process of this sort of digital transformation quite a bit. Quite a lot of technologies, their adoption suddenly boomeranged, especially things like this 360-degree cameras and kind of reality capture, and because people wanted to be on the site without being on the site and so on. So those sort of technologies, their kind of adoption has accelerated. In some cases, quite superficial, some cases quite deep. But in terms of project planning and implementation and digital transformation, I think it has it's starting to go quite deep, so it helps with, of course, in this sort of situation. And I hope that after the pandemic, it continues and it sort of stays that way, and people just don't go back to the previous sort of methods.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd quite like to add to Dr. Dave's comments. So, which were absolutely valid, and we're all aware that COVID has sort of forced us to use digital tools in a way that we didn't before, despite those digital tools being available. But I also wanted to draw a comment on the fact that it's attracting, certainly for digital leaders, it's making other agendas much more important as well. So leaders have to deal with well-being is a huge leadership topic. The well-being of your personnel, both mental, physical was well established in a way through the health and safety agenda, but the mental well-being, and that's a big role for leadership. It's also bringing to the fore other agendas, particularly the sustainability agenda. And that has long been talked about in construction. But I think as with digital tools, we're being forced almost into a situation where we have to do something about it. And I hope the digital and the sustainability agendas will combine more effectively in the future as a result of this. Thank you.
Okay, Hardeep, before we wrap this.
Yeah, I would also like to add that this is an opportunity for us, especially we who are trying to advocate the digital transformations, and we understand how important it is. In my first slide, I almost showed like how information is actually transferred in our industry and how do we access it. So just imagine we are somehow restricted to go on the site, but still we want to understand and monitor the progress of the process that's going on. So until we acknowledge the fact that this is something that's quite important for us, irrespective of the fact that there is a pandemic going on, there might be some other different risks that might come on the way. But this is actually a different approach. And I think necessity is the mother of invention. So let's take it that way. And let's keep the spirits high. And as Dr. Morgan also said, that sustainability is the topic that we definitely talk about very dearly, but somehow don't do anything about it. So I think that's the next agenda for 30th of January. That's also one of our agenda. And we're going to hear some insights about our other speakers. And let's just keep our spirits high and keep collaborating with each other and spreading awareness among each other. So I would also say thank you very much, all the attendees, for such wonderful and interactive questions. Thank you very much, Dr. Morgan and Dr. Dave. It was a pleasure to collaborate today and speak about publicly. I just enjoyed it too much. Thank you. And thank you, Brian, for hosting such a wonderful event, last but not least. Yes.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Hargit. Thank you, Dr. Beth and Dr. Bhargav. If I can just wrap this up with a few points coming from your talks. So what we are establishing here is that for all projects, our focus is the creation of value. And with that, we have to apply leadership in all areas, digital leadership in all areas across all lives, across all stages of the project life cycle, because it sets the why and the how on why we're taking on this transformation. And then we also want to, and the second point is that we apply technology appropriately. So we have to know what problem it solves, and then we appropriate according to where it is most beneficial and when it is most beneficial. We cannot just, randomly take on any technology and say, this is good, we adopt it, and yet we don't have anything that integrates all of these things together. And that is why we go back to the first point, which is digital leadership. And third, definitely transformation has its cost and we just have to regardless of the cost, I think we just have to all collaborate in it, partake in it. We have to learn how to share the costs for using all this technology, because at the end of the day, we have one agenda, and that is project success. And whatever benefit we derive from it, we will all share of it. We will be all partakers of that, of the benefits of taking on that project. And so with that, we thank you very much, Hargit, Dr. Beth, Dr. Bhargav. This has been a wonderful discussion, and we'll see you again, hopefully next year we will have a follow up on where we are after the pandemic, and hopefully this transformation will find normalcy uh, moving forward. That's why we are saying that we are taking this to the next normal, because we have to take it out of the current status quo and just keep it at where it should be. It has to be both now and moving forward. So with that, thank you very much, and we'd like to see all of you. We'll just take a 5-minute break, and we'll see you at the Tech Talks. Good night.